Will you be possessed or attacked? This world is a strange one. Whether or not you believe it, history has presented us with thousands of cases of demonic possessions, attacks, and hauntings. From making your life irritating to taking over your body, demons have it out for us, and maybe if you're unlucky, they might even show themselves to you. These dark creatures want to see us dead or dying. So, tonight, I will share with you 10 real demon ghost stories. Take a bath in holy water and relax. The demons will be waiting outside when you're ready. And if you can't wait for the next Darkness Prevails video, I do want to remind everyone that my website has over 500 scary stories, from true stories to creepypasta and videos you haven't seen before. New stories are released every week. Just go to darknessprevails.org. Now, are you ready for those nightmares? Number 1. Angel, Ghost, or Demon. Submitted by the Clay Mask Maker. So first, a little backstory. I lost my mom when I was 3, and my dad was in jail for a DUI until I was 4, so I lived with my grandma. After my dad got out of jail, he moved into this old house on my grandma's land, and he would often babysit me when she went out shopping or just needed a break from me for a few hours. My dad was also a Wiccan at the time, and he was pretty intimidating. At the time this happened, I was 5, and I had to stay with my dad for a few hours. For the most part, I just sat and watched TV, but after a while, I got bored and went to play in the living room. After that got boring, I started to realize that the sun was going down, and I was still in my dad's house. Being 5 and never having to stay the night at my dad's, I was kind of scared. Then out of nowhere, I felt like someone was behind me, and when I looked, there was no one there. At this point, I looked for my dad and found him asleep in his chair, so I thought, he yells when I wake him up, so I better not. After seeing him asleep, I went back to the living room and watched out the window, hoping to see my grandma's car. Then I had a sharp feeling of dread shoot up my spine, but there was also a sense of calm. Then I heard a woman behind me say,
"It's okay, she'll be back soon."
I looked behind me, but again no one was there. Then the same voice came again.
"Just stay still and wait. Your grandma will be back soon."
And the next thing I remember, I'm walking into my house with my grandma, holding a chocolate milk she had bought me. A few years back, I was talking with my grandma, and I said something about the house. She got quiet for a moment, and then said, "After one of the times you stayed with your dad, you changed. When I would pick you up, you would talk about this lady in white with black hair and pale skin. But when we got back to the house, you would seem to forget about it and tell me about seeing kittens or a dog or other things. And when I did ask you about the lady, you just looked at me confused and shrugged. So yeah, I don't know what this lady is, and I don't even remember ever seeing her. As well, I don't ever remember staying at my dad's house except for that one night." Number 2. Demon in the Kitchen. Submitted by Michaela Soros. My house is relatively new. I never experienced anything paranormal or out of the ordinary in general, so this was a very new and very weird experience for me. So one night, I was laying in bed. It was around 1:30 in the morning, and I was watching Netflix, and I heard something in the kitchen fall. I thought it must have been my dog, so I continued watching my phone. After about 10 seconds, I heard a voice in my left ear telling me that it wasn't my dog. At that moment, I freaked out and I looked around my room. There was nothing there. I calmed down a little bit and continued watching my phone. About a half an hour later, I heard something outside my door fall. Needless to say, I freaked out even more. I thought maybe it was my brother, but then I remembered he was having a sleepover with his friends, so it couldn't be him. I felt the need to go check what it was. The way my house is laid out, you come up the stairs, and on the right is my mom's room, and when you walk left of the stairs, there is a bathroom and a closet. And my room and my brother's room are right next to the bathroom, and then the family room. So when you walk out of my room and you look to the right, you can see the dark end of the family room. So, when I went out to check, I looked and saw my brother's tablet had fallen off the ledge. Once I took that into account, I looked to the right of me into the darkened family room, and I saw a very dark, black figure with beady red eyes. At that moment, I knew I had made a mistake by coming out of my room. I then walked back into my room and waited until morning. Once morning came, I went out of my room to eat breakfast, and I noticed the black figure in the kitchen next to a broken ceramic bowl on the floor, which is probably what had broke the previous night. Slowly, I went back upstairs for another hour or two, and then went back down again and ate, and I never saw the black figure after that. A few weeks passed by, and I started to notice there were noises coming from downstairs every night at 3. I would just ignore it and pretend I didn't hear it. All of this came to a sudden stop when my birthday came around. I still don't know if the dark figure is still in my house or not, but I haven't heard any more noises coming from downstairs, and I hope I never will. And I definitely hope never to see that figure again. Number 3. Demon Attack. Submitted by Truth. I didn't experience this myself, but my friend Bree did. This took her a lot of courage to speak of this demon attack again, but I'm telling you, this is all real. I was babysitting a 13-year-old boy named Mike. I know, that's a boy who can look after himself. But his parents asked me to babysit him because he tended to run off and get into trouble while they were gone. They left around 8 that night. Me and Mike watched TV for about an hour. Then we heard a tapping sound. It was coming from above us. I walked around the living room, looking up at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint where the tapping was coming from. And when I got close enough to where the tapping was from, it stopped, and it didn't start up again after that. The next night I came back over to babysit Mike again, or hang with him, he would say. Hours passed by when the tapping sound came back. I ignored it, but me being an easily annoyed person, I stood up and searched for the tapping. That night though, Mike seemed worried about the tapping. When I stood under the ceiling where the tapping was coming from, it stopped. Mike yelled, making me jump. I looked over at the living room from the kitchen. The TV was turned off and the lamp lights were flickering. I walked back into the living room, confused and frightened a little, and once I came back into the living room, everything went back to normal. The lights stopped flickering and the TV came back on. "What did you do?" I asked Mike, a little angry. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, sounding worried. But he didn't respond and just kept looking at me. Then, a door from the hallway slammed hard. I sat down on the couch next to Mike, and we both stared at his hallway. The door kept slamming. Every slam seemed to get louder. The TV suddenly turned off, but came back on as a white screen. We looked at the TV scared, and it made sparking sounds, and then the TV started to glitch black. A mumbled voice was barely audible from the TV. Mike covered his ears, crying now. The TV then blew. The shards of the screen flew by, and I lifted my arm to cover my eyes. I looked over at Mike, who had covered himself with the couch pillow. Me and Mike jumped off the couch and ran for the front door. The lights still flashing, some of them blew up too. We made it outside and onto the road. Mike ran to his neighbor's house. I stayed still on the road staring at the house. The house looked alive and crazy. I got this horrible feeling that something evil was looking at me. I turned toward the end of the street at the street lamp. A black figure was standing under it. I stared at it. The evil feeling coming from that black figure, and the thing didn't even have a shadow. Its head seemed to lean to the side, and that just made me feel sick. "Bree," I heard Mike say, grabbing my shoulder. He turned me toward him, my sickening feeling fading. He was talking to me, but I wasn't listening. I just looked around him at the street lamp. The black figure was gone. After that, I never babysat for them again. Mike kept trying to make me come back, saying that they got rid of the evil spirit. He told me that a priest came into his house and cleaned it, so I finally gave in and agreed to hang out with him at his house. His parents were at work at the time, so I slowly stepped into his house, fear filling my entire body as I remembered what happened last time. "It's okay, you're safe," Mike told me. He handed me a necklace with a cross on it. I hastily put the necklace over my head and let it dangle from my neck. I felt better knowing that I had protection. An hour later, it was still day. I was going to head home before it got dark, so I kept checking the windows. He asked me to grab his soccer ball from the attic as he set up the goal. I stopped when he asked me that, but my courage came back when I gripped my cross on my chest. I walked up the stairs to the attic. My steps were slow and they creaked every time I stepped on one. I walked into the attic, shivering a little now. It was cold, and the dark room didn't help with my fear. Not to mention the light in the attic was broken, and the only light was from the window. I tried to stay in the light, searching for the soccer ball, but I didn't find anything. That's when I heard a sound like fingers sliding on wet glass. I looked at the window, and what I saw was terrifying. The letters were still being written as I read them. The sentence said, "Do you want to play?" I walked backwards to the stairs, scared to death. The boxes in the attic started rattling. The light of the attic flashed, and now the sentence from the window was scratched into the wall. Tears were already coming down my face. A board flew at me. The corner of the wood board smashed into my nose. I fell backwards onto the steps. My head smacked a couple of times on the steps, and I hit my back against the wall at the bottom of the stairs. My whole body ached. The pain was stinging my back and head. My vision faded a little, and I felt blood flowing out of my nose and onto my clothes. I looked back up to the top of the stairs, still crying, and that black figure was standing at the top. I screamed my lungs out as I stared at the black figure. I could now see its red and black eyes staring back at me. It had a sinister grin of sharp teeth.
"You want to play with me?"
The voice sounded like a child, but followed with a deep, dark laughter that echoed in my head. I was screaming even louder now, running down to the door. Mike opened it, and I crashed into him as I ran. "What's wrong?" he shouted at me, scared himself. "It's in there," I cried, and that's when I felt a wrinkly, bony, cold hand grab at my ankle. I screamed out again as something tried to pull me back inside. Mike pulled me back away from his house and onto the street. His neighbors were running over to us. I was scared to death, and when I looked back to his house and saw the thing staring at me still, I wanted to run away, but Mike kept his grip on me. After I calmed down, which was about an hour later, I told my parents what happened. Mike and his parents were listening at the time. They were all shocked. The only evidence I had was that my shoulder was dislocated from falling down the stairs, but I did have 3 long, deep scratches on my ankle. I never went back, ever. Mike and his family left that house. Our family left as well. I didn't want to be anywhere near that house. Number 4. 2006 Demon Sighting. Submitted by Drunty. I'm not a man of true faith, although I did grow up attending a Catholic church by the name of St. Andrew's, the same church this occurred in. Some backstory first. My great-grandmother was originally a white-healing witch in Mexico in her younger days. She would recount stories of demons she had battled whilst being a healer. I, being young, never really believed in the faith that my family practiced, but after the events of this story, I have never doubted that there are higher beings and evil beings. It was June 6th in 2006, a cliché as it sounds. I had been brought to St. Andrew's Catholic Church by my great-grandmother and my grandmother, as they believed this was a day when demons would be rampant through all people and places. I was only 8 at the time and had been tired of staying at the church praying literally all day. It was around 8 p.m. and the sun had set. I sighed and stopped praying. I decided to look up at one of the skylights attached to the roof. I don't know why, but I stared at the skylight for about 10 minutes. When I noticed a long, black figure as it slowly crawled across the exposed, stained glass. I can still vividly remember the shadowy mass shape as it slithered across the 12-foot-long glass. It had 2 long arms with sharp points at the end, 2 huge wings that easily blotted out the sky behind it, 2 long, thin legs, and a tail that swished even after its body had left the window. I, to this day, won't go back to that church, and I now have a firm belief that something is beyond this life, something that is truly evil. Number 5. Rattle Demon. Submitted by Forsaken Wolf. This all started happening years ago, before my grandma died. I am pagan. I believe in the Norse gods, particularly Fenrir and Fenris, the Norse gods of wolves. I am very in tune with animals, the earth, and the spiritual plane. I was about 13 or 14 when my grandmother started getting really sick. She would stay in her bedroom in the dark, curtains drawn and lights off. There were times where I would smell rotting flesh or rotten eggs in her room. A lot of the time there, I felt cold, like something was watching me. My grandmother had been sick for years, but had quickly gotten worse in a very short period of time. At the same time, the darkness that I felt in her room got stronger and worse. Eventually, I think about 6 months after I first felt it. It was in the whole house, and it was very oppressive. Although my grandparents lived in a very hot area in northern Arizona, their house was always freezing. I would go into my grandma's room and know that this thing, which I now know as a demon, was watching me, growling at me, even attempting to scratch me. My grandma, who I was extremely close to, no longer recognized me. Her face was gaunt and different, her eyes were huge and blank, and her hair was stringy. She looked like a skeleton with skin. There were several times where I would go visit and walk into Grandma's room and hear her chanting quietly. Eventually, her chanting got louder and she became irate. She was in an almost constant rage. She would sit and chant, "Rattle, rattle, come to me, rattle, rattle, set me free." She would talk to this rattle, and it would talk through her, and it, in turn, would say horrible things to me. This demon, I believe, killed my grandma. She died at 53. There was something truly evil in her, possessing her, and it ruined her life. It also drove my grandpa into an alcoholic depression. He passed away not too long ago. I could barely recognize him or my grandma when they passed. Ever since, there's been this dark presence just waiting to come into my life. I see it out of the corner of my eyes every now and then, just lurking, stalking, just waiting for me to screw up and lower my guard. I hope no one else has to experience losing a loved one to an evil entity. It is truly the most horrific and terrifying thing one could ever experience. I know now that my great-grandma died the same way, and believe that there is somehow a curse on my mother's side of the family, as my mother is now going down that very same path to her fate. I can only hope that I do not follow, and neither do my daughters. I have spent hours, days, and probably weeks trying to find anything on a demon that goes by rattle or anything like that, even just a demon that has a voice like a rattle or something. I've come up with nothing. I'm desperate to know what this demon is, because one day it might come for me. Number 6. Demon Worshippers Encounter. Submitted by Saber Wolf. During my second year of high school, my 5 friends and I got really interested in airsoft. A few days before a major airsoft event, we would play against each other on an abandoned fairground. The first time we went, we explored a few abandoned buildings. One of them was a swimming center that had a large basement. We decided to stay away from that basement after we saw graffiti of pentagrams and mutilated animal corpses and black burnt-out candles. The experience really scared us and grossed us out, but we still decided to play above ground. One day, we decided to go after school just before it got dark. We went home quickly, packed snacks, our guns, and our BBs, and put on our airsoft vests to say the least. We looked like special ops soldiers. We met up at the right side of the fairgrounds, which was well hidden so no one could see us enter. There was a hole in the fence which allowed us to crawl through. After crawling through, one of my friends wanted to play a few games of free-for-all in the swimming center, even though most of us felt uneasy about the place. Finally, we all just said screw it and decided to play it cool, so none of us would think of each other as wimps. During the first match, we heard yelling and screaming, but the screaming we heard was almost animal-like, and it sounded like it was in a lot of pain. Scared and some of us pissed off, we started to shout back at the blacked-out stairwell that led to the basement. "What the hell are you doing down there?" one of my friends yelled. Then the screaming stopped, and now I could hear muffled crying, almost as if someone was screaming, but had their mouths shut. It went quiet, and a male voice came from the basement saying, "Come down and we will show you." I could see my friend's face turn pale. He was speechless as we booked it out of there, and we heard footsteps after us from behind. As we were running, we had run down the wrong pathway, and out of desperation we ran up a stairwell that led us to a ladder. We climbed up and found ourselves on the roof of the swimming center. We blocked the ladder's entrance with pieces of debris left on the roof. We waited and watched in horror as 3 tall and skinny men walked out, all in hooded jackets. One had with him a white plastic bag. One of my friends said that they shouldn't have messed with us like that and said screw them under his breath. My friend shouted for us to shoot at the sketchy men. The man with the white bag had dropped the bag and a bunch of blood spilled out. It looked like a bunch of mashed up meat was inside of it. Before I knew it, we all started to unload our clips at the men, and they started to run away. and so did we. We found a fire exit ladder, climbed down, and left in a hurry. We were stupid kids back then, but at least we were smart enough to never go back. Even to this day, it still sickens me to think of what they possibly were doing in that basement. Number 7. Demon in the House. Submitted by Starwolf13. This was a few years ago. I was sitting in my room and my son was in the room across from mine. Our rooms were upstairs in what was essentially the attic when my grandma was alive, and we lived with my parents at the time. My parents had left for the day. I was watching TV and my son was playing his 360. All was quiet, considering I was always hearing things in that house. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I thought it was a shadow of a car going by. I looked anyway, and there it was. I saw a shadow of a man, but it was larger than a human, and it was facing towards me. I sat there watching calmly for what seemed like 30 minutes, but it was just shy of a minute. It put its head down, turned, and walked away towards my son's room. I shrugged it off as maybe a shadow of my neighbor across the street. A few minutes later, I saw it again. This time I leaned forwards and looked out of the window. There's nothing. No neighbor walking by, nobody on the street, no cars, just nothing. I called my son over to my room. He walked in and the first thing I noticed was the shadow was bigger than he was. This shadow was so big you couldn't see his shadow at all. Now my son was 18 at the time. He said like any normal teen would say with the same attitude, "What do you want?" I just looked at him and turned to the shadow and pointed. He said, "It's just your shadow." "No," I replied. "If it was mine, it would be facing the other way, not towards me. Besides, I'm not in the light." That was when he realized it wasn't me, and he looked again. At this point, the shadow moved its mouth. I saw my son run as fast as he could towards me. He said, "Mom, it just said something." I didn't doubt it. A few years back, I was sitting with my Wiccan friend, and she told me that I had demons following me, who wanted me. She was the only one who had told me this. I am Wiccan myself, and have always seen things all my life, so this didn't bother me as much as it would a normal person. I have heard demons in this house a lot of times and seen them. I can go as far as to say I've felt them too. I have also heard my grandfather call me and seen him there, even though he has passed. That day, I went over the house clearing it of any foul spirits, and I haven't seen this demon or any others since. Number 8. The Gray Demon. Submitted by Joey vs. Horror. This is my experience with something paranormal. I am very into supernatural happenings and events and always like to read about them to get the spooked feeling. I have always been curious about what it would be like to have an experience of my own, but now I regret that. It started one night in March. It was a quiet evening and I was the last person up as usual. I was reading a book and was getting ready to go to sleep. And a quick side note, my closet door was slightly cracked open and was right across from my bed at the other side of the room. I put my book back down on the nightstand so I could read it the following night, but just as I was about to turn off my lamp, the closet door swung open with such force it made me flinch. I was terrified of what just happened. I sat there under my blankets for about 10 minutes until I finally got the courage to get up and go to my parents' room. Luckily, I made it without anything else happening. Fast forward 3 months later, I couldn't stop thinking about that night until yesterday when I was getting ready to go to my grandma's house to visit. My mom wanted me to go put on some deodorant because, I was in the middle of puberty and was getting ready to go into my teen stages. I walked upstairs and into the bathroom. Once I was done, I walked out of the doorway and to the staircase. But before I left, I heard a deep voice say something. It sounded like,
"Run."
Immediately, I looked over to where the voice had come from, and to my horror, a figure. It seemed to be 6 feet tall, and it had gray skin and deep black eyes. It was looking back at me. I was terrified, so I ran faster than I had ever run before to escape the thing. I got in the car sweating and shaking in fear. My mom was worried that something happened. She asked me, Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and off we went, still terrified by what I saw. No matter what, I will always be haunted by the look of those deep, dark eyes. I feel they will never leave me. I still currently live in that house, but I'll never go upstairs alone, ever again. Number 9. Demonic Life. Submitted by Matt. Before I delve into telling you my tales, I must warn you that I don't mind if you believe me or not. These experiences are real, and they have shaped the person I am today. With that, let's begin. These experiences take place from when I was 7 to most recently, of November of 2015. We shall start at the beginning, the first apparition. As stated before, this happened when I was 8. I had just fallen asleep, one of those close your eyes, open them, and it's suddenly 7 in the morning kind of nights. However, I awakened around 4. The right side of my bed was pushed against the wall, so I turned my head and saw nothing but wall. I then turned the other way, and that's when I saw a figure that will haunt me until I am laid to rest. Its eyes were black, a black hole for a mouth. Its skin was greenish gray. I remember pulling the covers over my head and trying not to scream. I peeked out from the covers and saw it was unfolding and folding its arms, as well as opening and closing its mouth, almost like it was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I then remember blacking out, finally opening my eyes, only to find out that I had lost 4 hours, making it 8 in the morning. This was what sparked my experiences. My second experience wouldn't happen until I was 10. I was watching TV one Sunday before church. I suddenly had a feeling of intense dread and fear come over me, like eyes watching me. It got so bad that I hid behind the couch I was sitting on. I stayed like this until my mother dragged me out to go to church. Throughout the day, those feelings permeated my entire body. This lasted throughout the summer, each day the feelings getting stronger and stronger. Every minute I spent in my house, the greater the feeling of dread and of being watched. The first night I was feeling this way, I remember closing my eyes and seeing a white skull shape. The details are fuzzy as this happened many years ago. That feeling, though, of something going into me, and I remember feeling completely isolated and alone. I started crying and screaming for my parents. They came rushing in to find me in the fetal position, whimpering. Nothing happened again until around January of 2015, when the same feeling came back. At this time, my family had moved, not out of the state, but just a few miles down the road from where we originally lived. It didn't come on as fast as when I was younger. This time, it was a lot more subtle. I felt minor bursts of dread instead of feeling weeks of it, as well as easily shaken feelings of being watched. Now this is where it gets crazier. I started to hear a voice. It had the overtone of a child, but it had a deep gravelly undertone. It would say things like,
"You are mine, by my power."
After hearing that, I decided to seek a priest. I told him everything that was happening, and was convinced that a demon was terrorizing me. He told me how to, in his words, rebuke spirits. This worked for a time, and the activity died down for a few months. It started to pick up again when I got interested in ouija boards. It was a week before Halloween that I got one, and started using it immediately. Each time I would use it, I got a feeling of what I can only say feels like something wanted to enter me. It wasn't on one specific place. I felt this feeling throughout my entire body. Each time I used it, the feeling got stronger and stronger. It is now 3 months since this time, and since I used a Ouija board last. There has been no activity since, and at this point I'm just waiting until something else happens. And number 10. Sleep Paralysis Demon. Submitted by Deku Geek. It was an average humid spring night in Texas. I was spending spring break at my aunt's house, playing video games with my cousins, sharing skateboarding stories, etc. I didn't go to sleep until around midnight. By then, the entire house was asleep, and I was restlessly tossing and turning in an attempt to find a way to get comfortable in the heavy Texas air. Once I was finally asleep, I awoke, or rather dreamed I was awake, to the sound of heavy rainfall and thunder hitting against the large window and crashing outside. I was laying face up when suddenly I had a strange feeling I was being watched. I looked around the room, and in the darkness, I was able to make out an outline of a small, childlike figure perched on the shelf a distance from the bed. As my eyes adjusted more, I could make out more horrifying details that made my blood run cold. It was extremely thin, body and limbs and all. Its head was oval-shaped with black skin and nails, which had to have been at least a foot long each, and it had piercing white eyes. My heart froze as I locked eyes with that thing for what seemed like forever. Then this thing started hissing, the type of hiss a cat would make when it was threatened by another animal. It started to inch closer and closer to me, all while hissing still. I could feel my heart racing. I wanted to scream for someone, but nothing came out. I tried to leap out of bed and lunge at this thing, or at least make a break for the doorway. But all of my effort to get out of the bed didn't yield any result. It only exhausted me. It was as though I was paralyzed. This demon, this nightmare, was literally crawling on the bed at this point, its hissing drawing louder and louder as it drew closer. I couldn't do anything about it, but I tried to pray to God that it would go away. Somehow I passed out, and I finally woke up the next morning with tears in my eyes and an overwhelming confusion in my heart. Just what the hell had I seen, and why? I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but never imagined I'd experience it ever in my life. I did not talk about my night's ordeal with anyone, and I have not had another experience of sleep paralysis since then, and I pray to God that thing stays away. There are far too many sightings and stories of intelligent entities attacking people to think there's not a parallel universe amidst our own would be foolish. There's some world entwined with us, filled to the brim with entities we can't see. Some are benevolent, but more often than not, they have evil intentions. That leaves me with one question for you, Night Watchers. What will you see tonight as you lie awake in bed? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks, and don't forget to visit our website to read stories, watch more videos, and submit your own experience. Just go to darknessprevails.org.